Welcome to the TRICHOMES Weekly Roll Up, where we cover the latest in state and federal legalization topics and cannabis news headlines. This week, the Ohio Secretary of State recently confirmed that a cannabis reform group has gathered enough signatures to obligate lawmakers to consider cannabis legislation. On the heels of Gary Chambers Jr. smoking cannabis during his race for Senate advertisement, a new poll was released that asked Americans if they would be willing to vote for a candidate that consumes cannabis in their free time. And a majority of 58% responded yes. And the Hawaii Cannabis Industry Association, concerned with extreme declines in sales, calls for reduced government regulation after a new report shows a decrease of over 98% over the past 3 years. And now, here are your hosts, John Bond and Jared Duggins.
What's happening, man?
Happy
How's
Friday.
it going? Happy Friday to you too, brother.
Yeah, well, it's going well. We've got a couple things to cover, but in the news, the House just passed the Safe Banking Act in the American Cares. We'll have to take a look at that. But personally, doing great. It's a little windy out here. How about up there at home base?
Man, it's this time of year, Central Oregon, you're looking at anywhere between like 40, sometimes it's colder, but usually it's like 40, 50, not a lot of wind. The mountain gets snow, so life's good, man. Groundhog, I think it's like yesterday was Groundhog Day, right?
Oh, nice.
I think it was.
Uh-huh.
And I think the groundhog saw his shadow, which means it's 6 more weeks of winter, which everywhere else they're usually not happy about that. When you live by a mountain, you're like, absolutely. That means that means we're on the mountain long into May. So that's not a bad deal at all.
Nice, a little more boarding time.
Oh yeah, totally, man. We got some exciting things to talk about today.
Most definitely. You have anyone you want to start, or do we want to first things last? Do we want to get into safe banking and what that is? It's not added on our list here, but I could pull up Marijuana Moment and kind of go over that.
Yeah, I mean, man, as always, I'm pretty liquid in terms of the conversation. So however we want to get into it, man, there's a lot of good things to talk about.
Nice. Definitely. Well, when it comes down to it is, today, and why am I not finding the link right at the moment? House officially approves marijuana banking amendment to large-scale bill set for final passage Friday. That was 22 hours ago. So, I don't know that it's actually passed yet. I don't have anything here that says it's passed yet. It's on the floor right now. So
it's on the floor. It hasn't passed yet. Trust me. We would know if it had passed.
I was going to say,
without a doubt. That being said, it's an exciting time though. Honestly, I've been focused on a couple of things this week, and that kind of hit my radar this morning, and I was like, interesting. It'll be really cool to see, man. I'll believe it when I see it type thing. Obviously there's a lot of things and a lot of red lines that happen. I hope that we can get there. It changes a lot of things. In terms of chances it will pass, I see that from Justin Johnson in the comments. Mm-hmm. As somebody that has a lot of colleagues that are far more well-versed on the GR side of this than myself, I will answer that with this is entirely my opinion. I would say still it's probably still under 50% for a couple different reasons. I hope that that's not the case, but there's a lot of things and folks that are opposed, I guess I would say, is the easiest way to say it without me going too deep into that. But that being said, it's inevitable and it's going to happen, and we hope that it's soon.
Yeah, well, you've got a couple different people opposing it. This is the sixth different iteration or time it's going up in different bills. Perlmutter had said, you know what, he's not leaving office without this passing, and he's going to try to put it in every major bill that passes the House or Senate floor there. So really, what are the chances that, John, I'd have to agree with you on 50-50 without trying to lean one way or another. It's the same wording, and you're going up against the same people. So realistically, the chances of them not calling it out after this vote, just the way they did last time, is 50-50 at best, probably.
I'm gonna jump off this topic because there's a lot of conflicting stories online in terms of whether it's passed or not, and I don't want to sound uninformed.
Right.
Maybe I think this is what we could revisit here. I'm seeing a lot of different things here, but why don't we talk about Ohio, and that'll give me a second to kind of dive in a little bit.
Perfect. Well, Ohio and its citizens have definitely been plugging away at it for the last month. They've been in the news. They had some problems collecting valid signatures. But in the end, they were able to get just about 4,000 more than required at 136,729. And that's to vote in legalization where Ohioans aged 21 and above would be able to purchase and possess up to 2.5 ounces of cannabis, 15 grams of concentrates, and they could also cultivate up to 6 plants per person with a maximum of 12 in a household with several adults. So the homegrown is involved, and it looks like adult use is going to be enacted there, or at least on the ballot there here in. State lawmakers have 4 months to review the cannabis reform plan put out by the campaigners, and they're hoping to have it on the 2022 November ballot. So that's when that would be up for vote for recreational in Ohio.
Totally.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's familiar with Ohio regs, but they're very interesting in terms of the allowance and the allotments, and so this is actually a very big deal. In terms of retailers in Ohio, there's it's like wonky things, like it's like 2.75 grams able to be sold at one time. I don't know the exact number, but like there's interesting cannabis regulation there, and so that strive towards normalization I think is a big deal, especially in like what I would consider Ohio being a part of the Midwest, even though it is technically on the Eastern time zone.
Right.
Anytime you see Midwest states making progressive moves in cannabis, it's an exciting thing to see for sure.
Absolutely. Well, and that kind of leads to that next part of what we were talking about on the voting poll surrounding. Why am I forgetting that gentleman's name? Gary. Did you get a chance to meet him?
Gary Chambers.
And his on the tail of that, there's a voting poll that came up, and it had to do with a poll to see who would vote for people who smoke cannabis in office, if they would vote for a representative that smoked cannabis from time to time. And just under half of registered Republicans, 47, said they would vote for a political candidate that recreationally consumes cannabis if approved. If they approve on the majority of matters. Registered Democrats were more inclined than Republicans, based upon 68% reported that they would vote for somebody who smoked cannabis, 15% only saying that they wouldn't. So essentially, you're looking at a combined majority there between the two parties of people who are okay with cannabis consumption on a recreational level, not even medical based, right? Which totally. Is, again, support, just like we're seeing in what you're talking about with Ohio and states and polls that you normally wouldn't see this. You're starting to see support reign through.
Totally. And it's interesting because that's like something that I feel like is just so like often pointed to in terms of polling, right? And that's where you have to wonder, like, are we watching the same movie as some of the folks that are opposing or even still trying to demonize cannabis, and some people don't even do it with a malice intent, right. Or a malicious intent. More or less, it's like, in the comments, I'd rather have a stoned president than drunk. Absolutely. I'll be the first one to say, as a Midwest kid growing up, alcohol is far more damaging to lifestyle, livelihood, and family than I've ever seen cannabis be on that side of it. It was funny. I was in a lounge, and I won't mention the name, but it's a really high-end lounge. Actually, of course, I'll give the shout. The New Tasting Room, they're a great customer of ours, right? And, they've been friends of mine for a very long time. I was sitting there hanging out. I was in Vegas last week, and, they said the initial security detail was like far more dense than it was today. And they realized that, you prepare for all these things and nobody's sitting there and smoking a joint and then going to fight somebody afterwards on a general level. Right now, I'm not going to say that like folks don't, there aren't folks that like still go out there and are like, crazy, whatever, but like think about if you have any type of relationship with a plant or any type of like social relationship with a plant, and you've been in those culture circles, like no one's fighting each other after smoking a joint. You know what I mean? So you don't have to worry about
Right.
that. Whereas alcohol at a bar at 1 p.m. near closing time, very different story. And so when you think
Big
about
time.
that, I mean, there's pretty obvious examples there. And then furthermore, like, to see someone that's willing to go out on a limb and represent themselves the way that Gary Chambers has, I think is just so impactful. I mean, at least to me personally, right? Because it shows that you can be intelligent, driven, and motivated and still consume cannabis recreationally to the rest of the world, right? I've been saying that for years, right? And there might be arguments about how, productive I am and motivated, et cetera, right? But at the end of the day, like when folks are willing to risk either make or break something like a Senate race, which is something you prepare your entire life to run through and go forward on, that says a lot to me. And I think that says a lot about where the industry has come from in this amount of time.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I see you're keeping up with the comments there. And you want to go in on that, John? I see you smiling.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm kind of keeping up with this here. Now I'm looking into it. It's I don't know. Very clearly, probably to no surprise to anyone, I am not a doctor, right? But at least in my own personal experience, and again, I just have to reiterate that this is my own personal experience. Medical use of cannabis has solved so many more things for me and people that I'm close to. My fiance has Crohn's, right? So she is constantly not feeling well because of an autoimmune disorder. And we go to doctors and they're like, oh yeah, here's like 7 different prescriptions. That we're not really sure if they're going to work or not. And we're like, okay, well, that's not our thing, right? And obviously, like to be social and go out and have fun, but like alcohol just wrecks her stomach, right?
Oh yeah.
And when you think about like, the endocannabinoid system, cannabinoids, and I won't like nerd out on it totally. Like, there's too much science behind it to make an argument otherwise, at least in my opinion.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, really, and again, not a doctor, and really scientist by smoking a lot and writing down the effects. No, I'm just kidding.
I consider you a scientist, man. I would say we're just scientists in pursuit of the truth, man.
Right. Well, it's something I posted, and it was something that I put out there accidentally. I thought the FDA put it out there, but somebody in our LinkedIn circle actually published it for the FDA, and it was about the ECS being proof that cannabis is medicine, right? We actually have a system that literally has receptors for the cannabinoid, and ultimately, we just got to find out about how that works all the way. How homeostasis is achieved through satisfying those receptors in a way that's, well, to each their own, right? It's something that we all know. There's a lot of different effects when consumption happens, different methods of consumption. Someone who can smoke a lot can maybe eat 5 milligrams of edibles and be sat down, right? And then all of a sudden you see a football player who's 280 pounds come along and eat 5 milligrams in the old days in Colorado and literally need to be held on to so that they, not time to leave yet because they were under the influence and just, going through it. So
Totally.
dosing is, but realistically, I use we're kind of like snowflakes ourselves. It's with the cannabinoid profile. It's a little bit more of a complicated snowflake, and trying to match these two things up. It's really a personal journey. So yeah, no, I have a lot of personal relations, like your fiance, my wife. With having autoimmune disease and that kind of thing. It's and use of pharmaceuticals not really in the books. It's not what she wants to do. Cannabis has been a life-altering thing. I just spoke to somebody else who, after a major catastrophe in their life, was taking the fentanyl suckers and doing that kind of stuff as well, and was out of work, and cannabis kind of switched that around for them. After 5 years out of the workforce, all of a sudden they're back at it at work, and cannabis is what turned their life around. So, getting access to this, again, without nerding out, but ultimately stating why we've got to make access to this happen. It's a big deal. It's changing people's lives. And so, John, yeah, thanks for sharing with us. That little rabbit hole was for you.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
So,
I'm interested too. So like thinking about this, right? Like, here's what I want to get away from, and like in terms of societally, right? Is like as I read through like the highlights of these types of things, and like this poll said this many Democrats, this many Republicans, and like without diving down that rabbit hole, I think it's pretty obvious I'm the most non-political person in the world. If it's not, I am the most non-political person in the world. So I think it's easy to say that.
Right.
So many folks don't even identify on either side of that fence anymore, right? Because ultimately, to not go too deep, but just to say in a quick note for the Grow Buddy over there, we align on a lot of things that I can't really super dive into, but would love to chat sometime, not in a recorded environment, right? Like the more that we fight systemically against this plant, and really it's big business, big pharma, all of these things, right? We're trying to politicize everything. And this is such a bipartisan human rights related element to it, right? Where it doesn't really matter what side of the aisle you're sitting on from that particular lens. This is something that impacts you. And I don't know, and we talked about this before on the show, but like there hasn't been that many bipartisan issues that could have such a widespread impact in terms of societally, regardless of how you feel politically. And like, just like everything that's happening right now, the media wants to politicize everything, right? Now, obviously, a YouGov poll is going to be very government, obviously politically driven in terms of like how they report things back. But like, I wonder when we can finally get away from that, right? Because like ultimately, it's like we're being bound trying to make it a Republicans versus Democrat issue when it's not, right? It's absolutely not. It's a big pharma, big business against the people issue, right? And that's really what it comes down to. And so it's just interesting. I'm like, I truly hope that I think that given the last couple of years, folks are a little tired of the media manipulation that exists just about everywhere, right? And for the first time, you start to see these conversations had, and like I had a conversation with my Uber driver last night for about 20 minutes, and it's like folks are starting to peek out from behind the screen a little bit and starting to communicate with one another and realizing that we're not all that different, right? We're not all that divided as we think that we are in terms of like how we roll forward on stuff like that. And I think just even getting reconnected to that human element is like so impactful, man. Like, and I truly hope that I see that, like that type of stuff gives me faith in humanity and what we're trying to do here more than anything, more than any poll or like telling me that, any amount of tax revenue, et cetera. I mean, sure, we knew that was there to begin with. Right. But like the general, the goodness of kind of what I was describing there, I think is like what moves all of this stuff forward faster is us realizing that we're not as divided on these things as we think we are. You know what I mean?
Right. No, absolutely. Well, and it's imperative that we get it right this time around, right? And when it comes down to implementing these laws and listening to the constituents, the people in each of these states who, each state has their own little nuances and that kind of stuff to go through, I think is one of the things that is the most important as it's coming to light here is that essentially, I mean, if it doesn't get done right, hey, Hawaii becomes the next thing that happens, and really people will lose faith in the process, right? Basically, Hawaii had a medical program implemented, and basically it's failing the people, and now they think that 69% of people obtain their cannabis outside of the medical program, of which basically, was an increase from let's see. For the sources. Oh yeah, no. So from 12% last year. So further source comes to worry purchases dropping in recent times from 110% in 2019 to 68% in 2020 to barely 12% last year, according to research. So really, it's when these things aren't implemented right, it's something that hurts the public and hurts everything that's going around. So when it's done for the wrong reasons, and a lot of that, as we've talked about before, got fast forwarded during this COVID time period, right? And a lot of these horses got run over by the carts, and essentially you're seeing a couple of the institutional mechanisms fail right now for lots of these states, actually.
Totally. Absolutely. And by the way, just a quick refresh that and this has happened before, right? Safe banking passed the House, but it still has yet to pass the Senate. And so that's going to be the continuous conversation. That's been where the blockers have been, right? Speaking of
Right.
that politicized piece earlier. So not quite there. I do, I feel I like seeing it added to the America Competes Act, right? I think that's
Right.
a smart thing. And based on what I've been able to understand, right? One way or another, man, it's not like people are going to stop showing up to the ball field here. Like
Right.
people aren't going to stop asking the question. So eventually there has to, it doesn't pass for this reason. It's amended and brought back, right? There's no way that it's not going to at some point. So I mean, that's a pretty obvious thing to say. It's like saying like the team that scores the most points will win the game, but like
Right.
still, it's one of those things where,
Yeah.
it's exciting to see. I mean, honestly, it's long overdue, man, without a doubt.
When it boils down to the contention is really people wanting to be recognized in the order of operations here, and that's it. Is we don't have a comprehensive bill that recognizes the fact that it needs to be decriminalized. People need to be out of prison. There needs to be reform on that level at the same time banking is happening. And this is literally what that final moment is about. Is like everybody's up in arms about the process, right?
Mhm.
And the semantics of the situation. And realistically, we don't have a comprehensive bill yet that has gotten to this level, right? That will allow for safe banking and some sort of decriminalization package at the same time. I think is really where this getting stuck is. This iteration is the same thing, right? It's the same thing going in a different bill. Again, we gave our insights on it, and we weren't ill informed. Unfortunately, it just still is on the floor and probably go late in the evening, just like most of these things do or whatnot. We'll find out tomorrow, but really, does it have much more of a chance? I wouldn't place a bet on it in Vegas. It's
Yeah.
yeah. While we would benefit from it, California, while all these different things, is there a real fear of decriminalization and all the other things that we're also fighting for and trying to make at the forefront of the conversation? Does that fall behind because safe banking is all of a sudden insulating current business?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't think so. The way I've looked at it, I know we've talked about this with folks like Steve Hawkins on here before from
Right.
USCC, who I would always venture to say he is obviously not only one of the most informed, but one of the people driving it forward, right?
Right.
Um, it's got to be something, right? And it's going to be kind of one of those things where it's like, if it's not this, it will be that. And like, they will all fall simultaneously once we get that first Jenga piece out, whatever that is, right? In my mind, the
Right.
lowest hanging fruit is decrim and getting people out of prison. And I feel like that's just an absolute no brainer. I still have yet, not that I have a ton of like conversations with politicians or folks on that side of it, but like, no one's yet to give me a good reason why that won't pass, right? Or why they can't. And I mentioned this last week too, but like I'm really excited to see folks in like states, and this is something I've come to understand, like weaving this into like legislation on the state level in terms of decrim, as opposed to waiting for it to happen federally, which actually is not obviously getting the whole thing obviously addressed and taken care of. But we say this all the time, like Kansas being a state and local government run business and industry, right? Like
Hmm.
the most impact can be had on that level at the state and local level. And so it's cool to see that like folks are kind of moving forward in that way and getting creative with it, because that in my mind is the most important piece. Now, whether it's that or say begging because it's easier because it makes more sense to folks that are lining the pockets in Washington, then sure, right? But something's got to give eventually. And once that first piece goes, everything else will soon follow.
Right. Right. Well, and just as we had mentioned in the comments, by Mr. J back there, is that we will be having Steve Hawkins on with us next week, and since we'll know by then, and we'll talk next steps with them, that'll be one to catch for everyone who's in the live with us right now, and who's catching this later. Catch up with us next week when we have Steve Hawkins on. But yeah, really looking forward to see what the outcome is and see what the next steps are, because uh, we've been stuck in this one for a minute, six times. So it would be nice to see something pass, like you said.
I wish there was like some kind of saying like 6 times the charm, right? But
Right.
I think once you start getting past 3, people start giving up. Let's talk about Hawaii, man.
Yeah. Well, essentially, uh, they're basically worried about the fact that they're losing their program, on their kind of like what's happening in California, on their inability to stop the illicit market from happening. And that's because their program, they didn't have enough shops. I'd been over there at the beginning of this, and really a lot of progress was stopped with um, the pandemic and that kind of thing. Even in the city where I'm in, permitting and all that kind of stuff, it just stopped for a whole year, which killed a lot of initiatives. I don't know how that hurt or supply chain affects them, or if that's affecting like the licensed growers on a different level than the illicit market or whatnot. But the way these taxes are happening, the way these systems are set up, they're not really trying to even compete with the illicit market, which is a big downfall on a couple of these markets like Hawaii and California. Um, I, I think that seems to be the problem. Do you have any thoughts about
I
that?
mean, let me put it this way. Like, in what world does does like eliminating a legal way to do something stop the illegal way of doing it from happening? Like, think
Right.
about that for a second. There's 31% of folks that are acquiring legal cannabis in a place where cannabis has grown freely for a very long time. Hawaii's got a great natural climate to be able to grow unbelievable outdoor cannabis, right? Not to
Absolutely.
mention there are very limited licenses on the islands, right? We
Very.
work with almost all of them. And so it's like, when you think about that, so those 31 folks that no longer can go to the medical dispensary to pick up their cannabis now are forced to purchase from the illicit market, right? So
Right.
like, in what world, like what expense to the government is closing down those dispensaries and killing the program have, right? You're literally just powering the illicit market in that way. It doesn't make
Right.
sense. You know what I mean? Like, and that's where I'm just like, when I think about these antiquated like looks at stuff, I'm like, who's the person that's looking at that and says, this makes sense? This totally makes sense. This is how we solve this problem. Like,
Yeah.
somebody please tell me. Point that person out to me, because I just can't get behind like the thought that this is any way impactful. I don't know. It is what it is
Right.
at this point. Like, it's laughable, right? This is all comedy. It's like, I don't understand. And really, like, they won't. I know it's they say things one way to try and instill things. Everything's public, everything's PR driven. But I don't see the program going away anytime soon.
Right. No, it's they got to get on the other side of this and figure out how to compete with these illicit markets. And I see, we got honky dick sized colas over here in the comments, and
What a
you
name.
know, yeah. If anything, legal cannabis should often cost less than the illicit market. And really, well, I don't know that can happen, um, especially in states where you got markets like California and these taxes are still happening and that kind of thing. Yeah, you got to get closer to it. You got to be able to compete with it, because realistically, California now has almost a standard for clean cannabis. So you're less likely to get something that's when you're talking about flower and that kind of thing that's harmful off the streets, and that's a
Dude, I
tough
tell
thing to
people,
compete with.
in any regulated market, the cannabis you get at the dispensary is far cleaner than this fruit that you buy at the grocery store. I promise you. And that's what people don't realize. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's like, and even that, the fact that there's still folks trying to argue against that fact, right? Which is crazy. Like, you're tested down to the parts per million if you're in Nevada on heavy metals and, pesticides and everything, right? I
Absolutely.
know that fruit on the shelf at a grocery store does not undergo the same scrutiny, without a doubt.
No. I mean, even down to the why am I forgetting Eagle 20, the powdery mildew pesticide. That's literally used on grape crops, because you can drink it. It could be put into wine. Grapes that have been sprayed with that for powdery mildew are fine and clean as long as you're drinking it. But once you apply torch to it, it's a whole different ballgame. So yeah, we're cleaner than a lot of things. There was somebody who had an edible company, and they were trying to do popcorn, and they failed. The whole process was clean, non-detect all the way, and all of a sudden the popcorn failed. Right, our test,
Yep.
the final product was the popcorn that failed.
Yeah,
It all boils down
totally.
to yeah, if you're in a legal market and you get the clean stuff, it's going to be a lot better. But we're talking about medical earlier, and really that's one of the things again that has been pushed to the wayside. It's like when someone has found this as an answer and then can't afford it, where do they go, right? How do they get something that's trusted? And you you go to where it's cheaper. You go and you get the compromised product because you can afford it and because it gets the job. So we're putting the people who need it the most out
and
the barrel.
And if that point doesn't resonate with you as somebody that's a policymaker, right, then let the point resonate of, so in what way does closing the only legal avenue to do this curb the illicit avenue of doing it that has happened for all time? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, explain to me how that's supposed to like stop people from going to the illicit market. And I would love to hear the answer to that.
Yeah. Well,
It's
obviously got us shaking our head.
Yeah.
So
it's in so many ways. It's like there's so many impactful things, and I just want to also like you can't really live on both sides of the fence, but it's just weed, right? It's just cannabis. It's just, and it was so woven heavily into our society until the prohibition of it, right? And like now it's one of those things where, again, at least maybe one of the only positive things about the instant access to information and folks getting charged up and being as informed as they would like to be on certain things. It's pretty hard to deny the movement at this point.
Right.
If you're a logical person,
Right. Which totally. We try to be. Nice. Absolutely, well, man. So, I mean, that's about it for those topics there. When are you going to be traveling this way, or should I get up for some snowfall up in Oregon soon?
I mean, dude, we can go either way, man. I'm thinking I'll be down in Southern California in the next month or two for sure. I know I'll be there in the couple months following. I've got some East Coast travel coming up, but we need to get another one going in the studio, man, for the podcast. We'd love to get some folks down there and have a little session and get the table set up and round table it the way it was meant to be. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Well, and in a couple of weeks, I'll be changing from this venue, freeway side, and that's why I'm plugged in on the AirPods, is to cancel out the freeway noise here. Cool. But we'll be back in the new studio where we'll have a round table and the ability to filter out and direct the smoke, so we won't be bothering. Oh wait, we don't have any neighbors anymore. We got the whole
no neighbors, man. No neighbors, no rules. Absolutely,
no neighbors, right?
Totally.
So
I love that.
Yeah,
you bet, man. Well, dude, it was great catching up again this week. We appreciate everybody, hopping there in the comments. Obviously, we'd love to hear from y'all if there's things that you want to hear us talk about outside of federal legalization as it relates to, our daily topics, man. Please let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. What he said. And happy Friday to all y'all. Have a great one. Have a great weekend. Be great. Be safe. And we'll talk.